Welcome to the Midnight Codex, where forgotten truths breathe and shadows tell their tale. Tonight, don't blink and don't look behind you.
My name is Tom Davis, 34 years old. I had everything, or so I thought, until everything was taken away in an instant. A few months ago, I had a predictable life, a decent tech job, a cramped but cozy apartment, and a girlfriend, Lisa, who I thought was my soulmate. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but we made it work. Work consumed my time, but we kept things alive. I convinced myself that everything was fine, even though deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then came the layoffs. One morning, I sat at my desk, checking emails, and there it was, a message. Due to restructuring, your position has been eliminated. I stared at it, trying to process what was happening. It didn't make sense. The severance package was meager. My savings would last only a few months. The next blow came swiftly. Lisa left. She said she needed space, that I was always too focused on work. The apartment that once felt like home was now empty. She was gone, and so was everything I thought I had. I couldn't stay in the city. The memories suffocated me. So, I left. I packed a few things, grabbed the essentials, and drove aimlessly until I found myself in Maple Street, a small town that seemed perfect for starting over. Quiet, isolated, a place to disappear. I rented a small house at the end of the street. It was simple, hidden behind overgrown trees. Anonymity. Just what I needed. I quickly found a job, a night receptionist at the Hollow Room, a local bar offering $50 an hour. It seemed too good to be true, but I didn't care. The man who hired me was gruff, his voice rushed. It should have made me uneasy, but I was desperate. When I first drove to the Hollow Room, a sense of unease crept over me. The bar was hidden away at the far end of Maple Street, tucked behind trees and a neglected parking lot. The neon sign flickered weakly in the dark. It looked abandoned, or maybe just forgotten. Inside, the atmosphere was stifling. A heavy silence hung in the air. The dim lighting cast long shadows, giving the place an eerie feel. The few patrons sat motionless at the bar, their eyes vacant. They didn't glance at me as I walked in. They didn't move. They just stared straight ahead, trapped in their own worlds. Behind the bar stood Billy Grant, the owner. He was tall, with dark hair beginning to gray and a thick mustache. His presence was imposing. He didn't greet me, just sized me up as if waiting for something. Finally, he handed me a folded piece of paper. "Memorize these," he said flatly. "Break one of them, and you're done." I unfolded the paper. The rules were simple, but the way Billy handed them to me made them feel like warnings. Rules for working at the Hollow Room. Never open the door to room 13. If anyone asks to enter, refuse them immediately. Do not speak to customers after midnight. If they ask anything, just hand them their drink. Keep absolute silence after 2 a.m. No sounds, no lights, nothing. If a guest comes in, with the name John Smith, do not let them into the bar, no matter what. Guests who appear out of place must not leave after midnight. Never speak about the things that happen here, except to me. If the neon sign goes out after 11:15 p.m., turn it back on immediately. If it doesn't light, something is wrong. I stared at the paper, feeling a knot form in my stomach. These weren't just rules, they were commands, and I had no choice but to obey. Billy handed me a set of keys. "Go ahead and get settled. We'll start you tonight." 10 p.m. As I walked to the back to settle in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just signed up for something much darker than I realized. The Hollow Room was eerily silent, the kind of silence that makes you question if the world outside exists at all. I stood behind the bar, wiping down the counter, the sound of my movements loud in the stillness. The only light came from a dim bulb above, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. The clock ticked, its seconds dragging in a way that felt wrong. Billy's rules repeated in my mind. Never open room 13. Don't speak to anyone after midnight. Silence after 2 a.m. I couldn't escape them. They were a weight on my chest, an invisible chain pulling at me with each passing second. At 11:15, I glanced at the clock. The bar felt even more suffocating than before. The few patrons sat still, as though frozen in time. Their eyes were vacant, staring ahead but seeing nothing. I wiped the counter again, trying to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt thick, heavy. Then he walked in. The man was tall, thin, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that covered his face. His coat was long, out of place for the warm night, and he moved with an unsettling stillness. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge me or anyone else. He just walked past and sat in the far corner of the bar. He didn't order a drink, didn't move. He simply sat, hands folded in his lap, staring at the wall. I could feel his presence like a weight in the room. The air seemed to shift when he entered, as if his stillness was distorting everything around him. I tried to focus on the glassware in front of me, but I kept glancing at him. His presence made the silence feel more intense, more oppressive. I wiped the counter again, my fingers trembling slightly. Then it came. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't from the front door. The sound was coming from the back, from room 13. I froze. The knock was deliberate, slow, almost rhythmic. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced at the clock, 12:30 a.m. I could feel the weight of the rules pressing on me, but this felt different. It wasn't the wind or a creak in the building. It was too purposeful. I glanced back at the man in the corner. He hadn't moved. The patrons hadn't reacted. It was just me, the sound, and the overwhelming sense that something was waiting for me. Knock, knock, knock. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to see what it was. I couldn't help myself, but just as I walked toward the door, I heard a voice. Don't. Sam, a regular, stood in the doorway, looking pale, eyes wide with fear. What's wrong? I asked. Room 13, Sam whispered urgently. You don't want to go in there. I blinked, confused. It's just a storage room. Why the big deal? It's not just a room, Sam said, stepping closer. Once you open that door, you can't go back. It changes people. My mind raced. What do you mean? Sam's face grew pale, his voice cracking. People who go in there, they don't come back the same, or they don't come back at all. I stared at him, his words sinking in slowly. My hand was still on the door handle. The knocking continued, louder now, like it was pushing me, pulling me. I don't understand, I whispered. What's in there? Sam hesitated, glancing nervously over his shoulder toward the back of the bar. It's not just a room, Tom. It's a trap, a test. If you open that door, you can't unknow what's behind it. It'll change you. The tension in the room felt suffocating. I could feel the weight of the knock in my chest. I wanted to know what was behind that door, but Sam's warning stopped me. What happens if I go in? I asked, voice trembling. Sam stepped back, his expression full of fear and regret. If you go in, you'll never be the same. No one is. The room, it gets inside you. I glanced at the door to room 13. The knock had stopped, but the silence felt more oppressive than ever. I could still hear it in my mind, that rhythm, the pull to open the door. I won't go in, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Sam gave me a long, searching look before nodding, relief flooding his face. Good, he muttered, stepping back into the bar. I stood there, my hand still hovering over the door handle. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't just empty, it was thick, suffocating, like the room itself was watching me, waiting. I turned away from the door, my chest tight with unease. The weight of Sam's warning hung over me. I didn't understand, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Not now, not ever. The first night behind the bar was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The hollow room felt frozen in time, each second stretching unnaturally long. The patrons sat motionless, their eyes vacant, not even a flicker of recognition when I walked past them. It was as though the bar was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to busy myself, wiping down the counter, adjusting the bottles on the shelf, but the stillness pressed on me. The clock above the bar ticked loudly, every second like a hammer on my skull. 11:55 p.m. I glanced at the neon sign above the door. It flickered once but stayed dim. It felt off. The man in the corner hadn't moved since he sat down. His presence was like a dark weight in the room, heavier than the silence itself. I kept catching myself glancing at him, trying to make sense of it. His stillness unnerved me. There was something about the way he sat, so rigid and unmoving, that felt wrong. I shook my head, trying to focus. I couldn't let myself get distracted, but I couldn't ignore the odd tension in the air. Something wasn't right. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. The sound was unmistakable, coming from the back, from room 13. It was slow, deliberate, the same rhythm like a steady heartbeat. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at the clock, 12:15 a.m. The knocking was louder now, almost as if it was pushing me toward the back door. I glanced over at the patrons, but none of them had moved. They didn't even blink. The man in the corner still sat frozen, staring ahead, his hands perfectly still in his lap. It was as if they were all part of the same frozen moment, suspended in a reality that didn't make sense. I couldn't stop my legs from moving. I had to see. I had to know what was behind that door. Just as my hand reached the door handle, a voice stopped me cold. Don't. Billy stood at the far end of the bar watching me. His face was unreadable, his eyes cold. There was no warmth, no familiarity, just a hard stare. "What's going on, Billy?" I asked, my voice suddenly weak. He didn't respond immediately. He just watched me, his expression unchanging. The silence stretched between us, thicker than ever. Then, finally, he spoke. "Room 13 isn't for you." I stared at him, my hand still on the door handle. "Why?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What's behind it?" Billy stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It's not just a room, Tom. It's a test. It's a cycle. Once you go in, you're part of it. You don't get to leave." I felt a chill spread through me. I couldn't breathe. It was as if the air itself had thickened, pressing in on me. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of his words, but they didn't make sense. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why am I here? What happens if I go in?" Billy's eyes softened for a moment, but the hardness quickly returned. "You think you're here by choice? That you can walk away when you want?" His voice dropped, just barely above a whisper. "You're already part of it. You've been drawn in. Room 13 doesn't let anyone leave." The door to the back creaked again, but this time it wasn't the knock. It was the door itself, groaning under pressure. I glanced toward it, my stomach sinking. Billy stepped closer, his voice low. "You're already caught in the cycle, Tom. There's no escaping it. And once you cross that threshold, you become part of its history." His words hung in the air, suffocating me. I felt my chest tighten. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I didn't ask for this. I just need a job, a new start." Billy didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked past me, his face hardening again. His gaze was distant, like he was looking at something, or someone I couldn't see. "You can't escape, Tom," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You've already crossed the line. You're part of it now." The silence in the bar felt heavier now. The patrons remained still, frozen, their eyes unwavering, their glass untouched. The knocking had stopped, but something else lingered, something that made me feel like I was being watched from all angles. I turned back toward Billy. "But I don't understand," I whispered. "Why am I being pulled into this? What's the point?" Billy's gaze flicked back to me, his expression unreadable. "The point is, you're already here, and the room will take everything from you, Tom. It always does." I stepped back, my body unwilling to obey. The words spun in my head. Room 13 wasn't just a room. It was a cycle, a test, a trap. Billy's face softened just slightly, as if pitying me. "I didn't choose this, Tom," he said, his voice low. "And neither did you." I turned toward the door again, feeling an overwhelming pull toward it. Something in the back of my mind was screaming at me to stop, but I couldn't. The door to room 13 was calling me, as if it already knew I was coming. But as I reached for the handle again, Billy's voice stopped me once more. "You've already made your choice," he said, "and now there's no turning back." The air inside the hollow room felt thick, like something was about to snap. It was the fourth night, but the silence hadn't loosened its grip. The clock above the bar ticked incessantly, its hands moving as if they were part of the room itself, stretching time. The patrons were motionless still, their faces locked in vacant stares. Their glasses sat untouched. The light dimmed slightly, as if responding to the tension in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that the room itself was alive, watching me, waiting for something to happen. I glanced over at the corner where the man in the wide-brimmed hat always sat. His presence was like an anchor, a fixed point in the unsettling void of the bar. Tonight, however, something was different. There was a subtle change in the air, as if the very walls had shifted. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it, like the bar was pulling me closer to the edge of something I couldn't control. The man didn't move. His hands were still folded in his lap, and his face remained hidden beneath the brim of his hat. But tonight, the feeling of his presence was even heavier. It was almost like the room was echoing with his stillness, amplifying the pressure in my chest. Then it came. Knock, knock, knock. The sound wasn't from the door. It was from the back, from the direction of room 13. My heart stuttered. The knock was slow, deliberate, each one echoing through the room like a death knell. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I glanced at the clock, 12:30 a.m. The knocking continued, rhythmically, as though it was growing louder, urging me forward. My mind raced with Billy's words. Room 13 is a trap. You can't escape once you open it. I stood there, frozen, my feet unwilling to move. But the knock continued. Knock, knock, knock. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was calling me. The pull was undeniable. I took a step toward the back, but before I could reach the door, I heard the soft creak of a chair. The man in the corner shifted slightly, his coat rustling as if he was about to rise, but he didn't move. His hands were still folded in his lap, but for the first time, his eyes were no longer hidden beneath the brim of his hat. He was staring at me. I froze. His eyes were dark, empty, like two black holes pulling at me. The weight of his gaze pressed on my chest, tightening my breath. It wasn't just his eyes, it was his presence. It filled the room, suffocating me. "You're remembering now," he said, his voice cold and hollow. The words were heavy, like they had been said 1,000 times before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were meant for me. I took another step toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. "You've always known," he whispered, almost too quietly to hear. His voice seemed to come from all around me, reverberating through the walls, through the floor, through my bones. I stood there, my hand frozen on the door handle. A wave of nausea washed over me. His voice echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake it. What did he mean? I've always known? I didn't understand. But his words felt like a truth I had buried deep inside me, a truth I wasn't ready to face. I turned around to face him. The man in the hat hadn't moved, but his gaze was still locked on mine. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was like he was drawing me in, pulling me toward him with an invisible force. "You're part of this now," he said, his voice softer but somehow more urgent. "Once you step inside, you'll never leave." "Not really." I swallowed hard, trying to push past the terror rising in my chest. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. Something about the way he spoke, the way his eyes bore into me, made it impossible to move. I looked at the door to room 13. The knock had stopped, but I could still hear it in my mind, as if it was coming from inside me. Knock, knock, knock. I had to know. I couldn't stop myself. I opened the door. 12:50 a.m., the hollow room. The air in the hollow room felt thicker tonight. The hum of the neon sign seemed like it was fighting a losing battle against the dark, and the silence was suffocating. The patrons sat motionless, their eyes vacant, as if they were waiting for something, waiting for me to make a decision. My mind kept drifting back to the door at the back, of the bar, the one that led to room 13. I tried to shake the feeling, but it was impossible. The rules Billy had given me were still fresh in my mind, but something inside me screamed to break them. I couldn't stop thinking about what might be on the other side of that door. What would happen if I ignored the warning? I glanced at the clock. 12:50 a.m. The hands seemed to drag like they had their own agenda. The neon flickered weakly, its dying light casting eerie shadows on the walls. I had to do it. I had to go back there. I couldn't fight the pull any longer. The knocking had stopped for the night, but I could still hear it in my head. It was relentless, like a drumbeat pulsing in my skull. Come closer. Open the door. A chill crept up my spine. I looked around. The man in the corner, his face still hidden by the brim of his hat, was staring at me, not moving, not speaking. But I could feel his gaze pressing on me, waiting for me to act. I could feel it in every inch of the room. Every part of me screamed not to do it, to leave, to walk away, to follow the rules. But then, the door, room 13, was right there, waiting for me. There's no escape, Tom. My hand moved on its own, pulling the keys from my pocket. It felt like an out-of-body experience. I couldn't stop. My fingers were already reaching for the door handle before my brain could process it. But the moment I touched it, the air around me shifted. A sharp sound rang out from the darkness, a whisper so low I almost missed it. Don't. I froze, my hand still gripping the cold metal handle. I turned, heart racing. Sam, a regular at the bar, stood at the end of the hallway. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sam's lips trembled as he stepped closer, his voice urgent. "You can't go in there, Tom. Room 13 isn't just a room. It's a test, a cycle. Once you step inside, you can't come back." I shook my head, confused. "It's just a storage room." "No," Sam said, his voice breaking. "It's not. No one who's ever gone in there has come back the same. If they come back at all." His voice dropped to a whisper. "If you go in, you become part of it. The room takes you." I looked at him, panic rising in my chest. "What do you mean, takes me? What happens to people who go in?" Sam stepped closer, his face filled with regret. "Once you open that door, you can't leave. You're trapped, forever. There's no escape, Tom." His words sank into me like stones in a pond, heavy and unsettling. The room around me seemed to get colder, the shadows growing longer. I looked back at the door. The handle was still in my grasp, but I couldn't move. The silence of the bar seemed to stretch on forever, suffocating me. Sam's voice echoed in my mind. "No one who goes in there comes back the same." "You're already part of it," a voice whispered from the back of the room. I whipped around, my heart in my throat. The man in the corner was standing now, moving toward me slowly. His eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. He said nothing, but his presence was undeniable. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. My chest tightened. His shadow seemed to stretch across the room, engulfing everything in its path. I took a step back, but my feet felt frozen to the floor. The voice had been his. It wasn't just in my head anymore. "You've already made your choice," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "It's too late to turn back now. Room 13 is waiting for you." I couldn't breathe. The door seemed to grow larger, towering over me. It was no longer just a door. It was an abyss, a void that was calling my name. "Come closer." I turned back toward Sam, but he was gone. In his place was the man, standing right in front of me now, his face still hidden beneath the brim of his hat. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in around me. "Go in," the voice whispered again. "You've already crossed the line. You can't run from it." I couldn't fight it anymore. I had to know what was behind that door. I had to know what would happen if I opened it. I turned the handle. 1 a.m., the hollow room. The moment I stepped inside, room 13, everything changed. The door slammed shut behind me, and the cold hit me like a punch to the chest. The room was darker than it had been before, the air thick with something I couldn't identify, fear, suffocation, or maybe both. The walls seemed to bend inward, closing me in, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. I had no time to think. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow, every step I took toward the center of the room heavier than the last. The mirror beside the chair flickered, glowing faintly as though it were alive, waiting for me to approach. I moved closer, my legs shaking, but I couldn't stop myself. It felt like the room was pulling me, like it had a mind of its own. As I reached out to touch the surface of the mirror, the air turned cold. Ice cold. My fingers trembled, but I couldn't pull away. The reflection rippled under my touch, warping like water disturbed by a stone. That's when I saw it. The reflection wasn't mine. It was a man, sitting in the chair, staring at me with empty, hollow eyes. His face was pale, his lips twisted into a twisted grin that didn't belong to anyone. The room seemed to shrink, pulling the shadows tighter, suffocating me. I stumbled backward, trying to breathe, but I couldn't. The air was too thick. My head spun. "Who are you?" I whispered, the words barely leaving my lips. The reflection didn't move. It stayed still, staring at me. And then it stood up, slowly, stiffly. Its movements were unnaturally smooth, too smooth. It was me, but it wasn't. It was something else. My heart was racing, my pulse deafening in my ears. I had to get out of there. I had to leave before it was too late, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like the room had frozen me in place, its grip tightening around me with every passing second. "You've always known," the voice echoed in my mind. I turned toward the door, but it wasn't there anymore. The walls had closed in, trapping me in the center of the room. There was no way out, no escape, only the mirror, only the reflection. I reached for the door handle again, but it wouldn't budge. The room was alive now, moving, shifting. The darkness enveloped me, and the reflection took a step closer, its hollow eyes locked on mine. My breath caught in my throat as it moved toward me. "You can't leave," it whispered, the voice growing louder, more insistent. "You've crossed the line. You're part of it now, forever." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body was frozen, my limbs heavy as though they were made of stone. I was trapped, completely and utterly trapped. "You can never escape, Tom," the voice continued, echoing in every corner of my mind. The room felt like it was collapsing around me, the walls closing in tighter, pressing me into the chair. The reflection was right in front of me now, its face inches from mine, its grin stretching wider. "You've always known," it said again, the words dripping with cold certainty. "This is where you belong. This is where you stay." My chest tightened as I gasped for air, the walls of the room closing in faster now. The reflection reached out, its cold, trembling fingers brushing against my face. I could feel its touch, colder than ice, sinking into my skin, pulling me into the darkness. My mind screamed for release, but there was nothing, just the cold, just the endless void. And then it was over. The reflection in the mirror disappeared, leaving only darkness behind. The room was empty, still and silent. But I knew, deep down, I wasn't alone. 1:30 a.m., the hollow room. I woke with a start, gasping for air, my chest tight, as though the darkness had tried to suffocate me in my sleep. The cold sweat clung to my skin, and my heart raced in the silence. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. My eyes flicked open, searching the darkness of the bar, but nothing had changed. The same dim light flickered from the neon sign outside, casting a ghostly glow through the grimy windows. The same stillness hung in the air. But something felt different. The room, the air, the shadows, they felt thicker, like they were pressing in on me, suffocating me, even in my dreams. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone, even though no one had moved. The patrons sat as still as ever, their eyes vacant, staring into nothingness. It felt like they were watching me, waiting for me to break. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the fog in my head, but the memory of room 13 wouldn't leave me. The mirror, the reflection, the feeling of being trapped, like something was slowly pulling me deeper into the void. I couldn't tell if I was still dreaming or if I had just woken up in another nightmare. The door to room 13 stood at the far end of the bar, its presence looming over me, pulling me toward it. I could hear the knocking again, faint at first, like a distant echo in the back of my mind, but it grew louder with each passing second. The rhythm, slow and deliberate, taunted me. Come closer. Open the door. I glanced at the clock. 1:30 a.m. The minutes seemed to stretch forever, the seconds dragging me deeper into the room. I could feel the weight of it, like time itself had slowed down, pulling me back into the cycle. I had to go. I had to see what was behind the door. The knocking in my head was relentless now, like a heartbeat that wouldn't stop, urging me forward. Each step I took toward the back felt like I was sinking deeper into quicksand. Don't go, a voice whispered in my ear. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone in the bar. It was like it came from the very walls, echoing around me. I turned, but no one was there. Only the empty bar and the shadows stretching across the floor. The knocking continued, louder, closer, come closer, open the door. I looked at the door, my hand already moving toward it. My fingers brushed the cold metal handle, but something held me back. I couldn't do this again. I couldn't face whatever waited behind it, but the door, it was calling to me. The pull was too strong. I tried to turn away, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot. The room seemed to twist around me, warping and bending like the walls themselves were alive, pressing in. I could hear the breath of the bar, slow, deep, like it was watching me, waiting for me to make the inevitable choice. You can't escape, the voice whispered again, louder this time. Not now, not ever. I gasped for air, my chest tightening as the walls seemed to close in around me. The knocking had stopped. The silence that followed was worse than anything. It was like the bar had held its breath, waiting. And then, without warning, the door opened, slowly, creaking on its hinges. I didn't move. I couldn't. The room around me seemed to collapse, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I felt my mind slipping, like I was losing myself in the fog of the bar. My hand was still on the handle, but my body felt numb. The door was open, and something on the other side was waiting. The silence hung in the air like a heavy cloud, thick with anticipation. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, even though no one moved. Their presence was suffocating. The knocking in my head had stopped, but the pull of room 13 was stronger than ever. I couldn't fight it any longer. I had to go in. With one last deep breath, I stepped forward. My body moved on its own, as if the room itself was taking control. Every step I took toward the open door felt like walking into a void, a darkness that swallowed everything in its path. And then, as I crossed the threshold, everything went black. 1:45 a.m. The Hollow Room. I stepped into room 13 with a sense of finality. The door creaked shut behind me, and for a moment I stood there, frozen, surrounded by darkness. The air was suffocating, thick with the heavy weight of something I couldn't understand. The cold settled deep in my bones, and the silence was so profound. It felt like it was pressing against my chest, pushing the air out of my lungs. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Every part of me screamed to turn back, to leave, to walk out of this nightmare. But the pull of the room was overwhelming. The walls seemed to close in, tightening their grip around me, making it impossible to escape. It felt like the room itself was alive, watching, waiting for me to make my move. I glanced around, my vision slowly adjusting to the dim, eerie light that flickered from the cracks in the walls. There was the chair, the same chair from before, sitting in the middle of the room. But it wasn't just a chair anymore. It felt like a throne, a seat for someone who had already claimed this place, claimed me. The mirror beside it glowed faintly, the surface rippling like water disturbed by an unseen hand. I didn't want to look into it. I didn't want to see the reflection, to see what I had already known, what I had always known. But my feet moved on their own, dragging me closer. The reflection was waiting. I didn't see myself. No, I saw someone else. The figure sitting in the chair wasn't me, but it was. It was a twisted version of myself, hollow eyes staring back at me with an empty smile stretched across its face. It wasn't just a reflection, it was a part of me. My past, my regrets, my sins, all of it trapped inside this room, waiting to consume me. I stumbled back, but my legs felt like lead. The walls pressed in, suffocating me. I could hear my breath, shallow and ragged, but it was drowned out by the voice that had been haunting me since I first stepped into this place. "You can't escape, Tom," it whispered. The voice was colder than ice, colder than the room itself. "You've crossed the line. You've always been part of this." The figure in the mirror moved, standing up slowly, deliberately, its movements jerky and unnatural. The reflection stepped out of the mirror, and for the first time, I could feel it. It was real. It was me, or what was left of me. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in this room, in this cycle, this endless nightmare. "You can never leave, Tom," the voice continued, its cold fingers creeping into my mind. "You've already made your choice. You've always known this was where you would end up." I wanted to scream, to fight back, but my voice was lost in the thick air of the room. My thoughts were clouded, like a fog, descending over my mind. The room was closing in, and I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, my past, my mistakes, my inability to escape. The figure in the mirror, the reflection that wasn't me, stepped closer, its eyes never leaving mine. I could see it now, the hollow emptiness inside its gaze. The reflection reached out, its hand cold as death, brushing against my cheek. "You can't hide from what you've done," it whispered. I tried to push it away, but my hands were frozen. I couldn't fight back. I couldn't escape. The air grew thicker, colder, and then everything went still. The reflection smiled, its mouth stretching wider, too wide, like it was tearing at the edges of reality itself. And then, the walls collapsed. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, but the room was gone. The chair, the mirror, the reflection, they were all gone, leaving me in darkness. I could hear the voice still echoing in my mind, louder now, like it was inside my head, filling every thought, every fear. "You can never leave, Tom." I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't obey. I could feel the darkness wrapping around me, suffocating me, pulling me deeper into the void. And then, the light flickered. 2 a.m., the hollow room. The air in the bar had changed again. It wasn't just the temperature, though that too had dropped to an unbearable chill. No, it was something else, something more unsettling. It was like the room itself was alive, breathing, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. The walls were closer now, the shadows longer, as though they were stretching to meet me. I could feel the room watching me. I stumbled forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The chair was still there, in the center of the room, but now it looked different. The fabric was darker, almost like it had absorbed the shadows around it. The air was thick, swirling with an energy that I couldn't explain. It felt like the room was shifting, warping, its edges bending and twisting as if it were trying to pull me deeper into itself. I wanted to leave. I wanted to turn around and walk out the door, but the door was no longer there. There was nothing but darkness behind me now, stretching endlessly. I was trapped in a place that had no beginning or end, just an infinite loop of shadows and whispers. I turned back to the chair. It was calling to me. I could feel it. I knew it was waiting for me, just like everything else in this place. It had been waiting since the moment I stepped into room 13. But as I approached, something changed. The chair. It wasn't the same. It had shifted. The fabric, the wood. It all looked different, distorted, as if it was alive. The shadows around it had grown darker, thicker. I could feel them creeping toward me, pulling at my feet, trying to drag me down. I reached out to touch the back of the chair, my fingers brushing against its cold surface. The moment I made contact, the room shuddered. The ground beneath me cracked, the walls warping and shifting around me, stretching into impossible angles. The chair twisted, its legs twisting like roots of some ancient tree, digging into the floor. And then it happened. The reflection. It wasn't in the mirror this time. It was in the chair. It was sitting there, staring at me with hollow eyes, grinning in that same twisted way. It was me, but not me. It was like I was looking at myself from a different world, a twisted version of myself that had been trapped here far longer than I had. It smiled, and I could see its eyes, cold, lifeless, empty. "You never left, Tom," it whispered, its voice cold and echoing through my mind. "You've always been here." The room began to spin, the walls twisting around me as if the very space itself was collapsing. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nowhere to go. The chair was still there, still watching me, the reflection still smiling, its grin widening as I backed away. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows growing longer, more suffocating. It was like the room was trying to swallow me whole. The reflection in the chair reached out, its hand stretching impossibly far, its fingers curling like claws. "You can't escape," it said, its voice louder now, echoing in every corner of the room. "You were always part of this." I reached for the door, but the handle was gone. There was nothing. Just the reflection, just the chair, just the endless darkness closing in around me. "You can't escape, Tom." The voice was no longer just in my head. It was everywhere, every shadow, every crack in the room. It was the room itself speaking, calling to me, pulling me in. I turned around, my pulse quickening, my chest tight with fear. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The air was thick, suffocating, and it felt like the room was alive, its pulse matching mine, drawing me closer, pulling me deeper into its grasp. I had to get out. I had to escape, but the room wouldn't let me. The reflection, the twisted version of myself, kept smiling, kept staring at me with those empty eyes, and I knew I would never leave. Not now, not ever. The room was closing in around me, its walls narrowing, its shadows reaching for me. The chair, the reflection, the endless cycle. This was my fate now. There was no escaping it. Room 13 had claimed me. 2:30 a.m., the hollow room. The room had shifted again. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but the air felt different, heavier, colder. The walls seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting like a living thing. I was trapped in a place that didn't follow the rules of time or space. Every inch of it felt like a nightmare, and yet I knew it was real. I could hear the whispers again, soft at first like a faint echo in the back of my mind, but they were growing louder. They had always been there, just beneath the surface, but now they were everywhere. The air hummed with them, filling every corner of the room. "You've always known," they whispered. "You can't run from it anymore." The reflection was still with me. It wasn't just in the mirror anymore. It was everywhere. Its eyes, empty and hollow, followed me around the room. I could feel its presence in every crack, every shadow, its smile stretching wider with each passing moment. I turned in circles, trying to escape its gaze, but no matter where I looked, it was there. In the corners of the room, in the reflections of the broken glass, in the very air itself. "You're part of this," it whispered again, its voice seeping into my mind, curling around my thoughts like a snake. "You can't escape your past, Tom. You were always meant to be here." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath shallow. I needed to get out. I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in, the shadows wrapping around me like chains. I had to leave. I had to escape. But where? Where was I supposed to go? I turned toward the door, but the moment I moved, it disappeared. It wasn't there anymore. There was only darkness. It was as though the room had swallowed it whole. I reached out to the space where the door had been, my hand trembling, but there was nothing. Nothing but the suffocating blackness. "You never left," the voice said again, louder now. "You've always been here. You've always been part of it." The words cut through me like a blade. My head spun, and I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air, but there was none to be found. I felt like I was drowning, sinking deeper and deeper into the room, into the shadows. I closed my eyes, desperate to block out the voice, but it wouldn't stop. It was in my head, in my heart, in my very soul. You've been here before, Tom, it continued, its tone soft, almost coaxing. This is where you were always meant to end up. There is no escape. You are part of this cycle. My pulse raced as the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just a victim of this place. I wasn't just trapped. I had been here before. I had done this before. The memories, fragments of them, began to flood back. Faces, places, moments I had buried deep inside me. I saw flashes of myself, walking through the same door, sitting in the same chair, hearing the same whispers. I had tried to forget, but I couldn't. The truth was unraveling, tearing through me like a storm. I'd been in this room before. I'd never left. The reflection smiled wider, its mouth stretching impossibly far, its grin stretching across its face like a grotesque mask. You've always known, it said again, its voice now a chorus of voices filling every corner of my mind. This is your fate, Tom. This is where you belong. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but there was no escaping, no place to run. No, I shouted, my voice raw, desperate. I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose this. But the reflection didn't answer. It just stood there, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. Its grin never wavered. The walls around me began to close in faster now, the darkness pressing down on me, suffocating me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The room had become a prison, and I was the prisoner. The cycle had already begun, and I was caught in it, unable to escape. You can't hide from it, the voice whispered. You've always been here. You've always been part of it. I collapsed to the floor, the weight of the truth crushing me. I'd been part of this room long before I ever stepped inside. I was just another lost soul, caught in its cycle, its eternal trap, and there was no escaping it. The darkness closed in, and I felt myself slipping, fading, becoming part of the shadows. There was no end. There was no way out. 3 a.m., the hollow room. I had stopped counting the hours. Time didn't matter here. It had stopped the moment I stepped into room 13. Every second felt like an eternity. My mind, my body, everything felt detached from reality. I was no longer sure what was real and what wasn't. The darkness had consumed the room completely now. The shadows were no longer just shadows. They had become alive. They moved around me, curling like tendrils, whispering my name, pulling at my thoughts. The walls, once solid, now seemed to breathe. The air was heavy, suffocating, like a vice tightening around my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I stumbled across the floor, my legs unsteady beneath me. I reached for the wall, my fingers trembling as I tried to steady myself, but the surface was slick, warm. It felt wrong, like the room itself was shifting, changing with every step I took. There was no escape, no way out. And then I saw it, the chair. It was in the center of the room, just as it always was, but this time it wasn't empty. The figure was sitting there, waiting for me. I could feel its eyes on me, even though its face was obscured by shadows. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just sat there, like a monument to my own failure. I wanted to turn away, but my body wouldn't obey. My feet moved toward the chair, against my will, as if I was being pulled by invisible strings. I was walking toward my own doom, and I couldn't stop it. You're here, the voice whispered in my mind. You've always been here. I reached the chair, my hands shaking as I touched its cold, smooth surface. The moment I made contact, the room seemed to shudder. The shadows around the chair grew darker, like they were alive, crawling up the legs of the chair, wrapping around me. I looked into the seat and I saw myself. It wasn't just a reflection, it wasn't just a vision, it was me, but twisted, hollow, empty. Its eyes were vacant, its smile stretched too wide, and the same whispering voice echoed in my mind. You never left, Tom. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. My legs buckled beneath me, and I collapsed into the chair. The moment I sat down, the world shifted. The room blurred, the air thickened, the shadows closed in, and I could feel them crawling over my skin, digging into my very soul. I gasped for air, but there was none. The chair, it was pulling me in, and I couldn't break free. I tried to stand, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped. I was part of it now, part of room 13. "You're mine," the voice said, this time louder, more insistent. "You always have been." I reached out, but there was nothing. Nothing but the cold darkness. The walls were closing in, and I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. My memories, fragments of them came flooding back. Faces, places, things I had done, things I had forgotten, and the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been here before. I'd always been here. Room 13 was never a place I stumbled into. It was always a part of me. It was where I was meant to end up. It was my prison. "You can't escape," the voice whispered again, this time with a tone of finality. "You are part of the cycle, forever." The shadows seemed to twist, growing darker, colder. They closed around me, squeezing the life out of me. I was drowning, suffocating, trapped in a never-ending loop. I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear myself away from the chair, but it was too late. The darkness was too powerful. I was no longer in control. I had never been. And then, everything went silent. The room disappeared. The chair, the shadows, the whispers. Everything was gone. All that was left was the crushing silence, and I knew, in that moment, I was trapped in it forever. Room 13 had claimed me. It was over. 4 a.m., the hollow room. I woke with a jolt, gasping for air, my lungs burning as if I had been underwater for too long. The darkness still surrounded me, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My body felt numb, as if I was no longer connected to it. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. I tried to focus, tried to remember what had happened, but the memories were slipping away like sand through my fingers. Room 13. Had it all been a dream? Number. It wasn't a dream. It couldn't be. The faint hum of the neon sign outside was the only sound in the bar, but it felt distant, like it belonged to another world. The shadows seemed to stretch across the walls, curling and twisting like they were waiting for something. Waiting for me. I forced myself to sit up, my head spinning as I looked around. The bar was empty, just like before. The same stillness, the same silence. But it felt wrong now. There was something off about the place, something watching me. The air was thick with an oppressive weight that I couldn't shake. I could feel the room pressing in on me, pulling me back, like it was trying to claim me again. The chair was there, in the center of the room, just as it always was. But now, it wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a monument, a throne, a seat for the ruler of this place, and I knew deep down that the ruler wasn't someone else. It was me. I tried to stand, but my legs refused to move. It was like the room had a hold on me, keeping me trapped. I could feel it, wrapping around me, tightening with every passing second. The door to room 13 was still there, but it didn't feel like a door anymore. It felt like a trap, a portal to something worse than death. It wasn't just a physical space, it was something much darker, much more sinister. And I was drawn to it, helpless against the pull. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to collect my thoughts, but the whispers started again, soft at first, like a breath against my ear, then growing louder. The same voice that had tormented me since I first stepped into room 13. "You can't escape," it whispered. "You were always meant to be here. You've always been part of this." The voice echoed in my mind, bouncing off the walls, becoming louder and more insistent with each passing second. "There is no way out. You are already part of the cycle. You always have been." I stood up, or at least tried to, my body shaking, my head spinning. I stumbled toward the door, but as I touched the handle, the room shifted. It didn't move physically, but the space around me began to distort. The walls seemed to breathe, to stretch and warp like the room itself was alive. It was closing in on me. I pulled the door open, but the room didn't change. It stayed the same, empty, silent, suffocating. I stepped into room 13, the familiar chill settling into my bones as I crossed the threshold. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. I wasn't alone anymore, not in my head, not in my heart. Something had followed me into this room, and it wasn't letting go. I felt the presence immediately. The room seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't explain. The walls pressed in, the shadows stretching around me, reaching for me, pulling at me. There was no escape. And then the reflection appeared. It wasn't in the mirror. It wasn't in the chair. It was everywhere. It was in the walls, in the shadows, in the very air I breathed. I could feel it, its eyes on me, its smile twisting in the darkness. It was me, but it wasn't. It was something more, something that had always been there, waiting. "You can't run from it anymore," it said, its voice a low growl, filling the room, vibrating through my bones. "You've always been part of this. You always will be." I tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't breathe. The room had consumed me, and I knew, deep down, there was no way out, no escape. The reflection stepped forward, its face coming into focus. It wasn't a man. It wasn't even human. It was something else. Something ancient. Something that had always been waiting for me to return. "This is your fate," the reflection whispered, its voice thick with finality. "You are one of us now." I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. The room had taken me, and it wasn't letting go. The walls closed in, the shadows reached for me, and I knew I had become part of room 13. I was no longer Tom Davis. I was just another lost soul, another victim of the cycle, caught in its grasp forever. And then the light flickered.